Hello, welcome. My name is Michael Schumann, and I am the administrator of the Karmic Margin Call Project. This presentation is called the One-Person Presentation. It's also called Actionable Intelligence. So this might be your first contact with this kind of material. It might be your third contact. So we're going to interweave all three presentations in this session today. So there are two intentions with this audio recording and this video recording today. The first intention is to help you put together a one-person presentation that lasts for about an hour, maybe a little bit more than an hour. So it is my belief and my intention that everybody in this world has something of value to give. And if we all connect together in a service and education market economy, we can kind of change the rules of how the hierarchy works. The second intention is to help you to understand the dynamics of how a hierarchy works. There's dysfunctional relationships and there is the encouragement of dysfunctional relationships. And this presentation will help kind of tie in all of the other presentations, the 21st Century Hero's Journey, the Most Meaningful Conversation, and tie it all in together and help you to understand how to identify what is a dysfunctional interaction and how to create a functional interaction out of that. Okay, and I'm just going to adjust some of my lighting here. Okay, so the first thing that I want to emphasize here in the very beginning is that the presentation is about you. And before you come to a presentation like this, I want to ask you three questions. And I want you to consider these three questions before listening to the rest of this recording. The first question is, who are you? You know, who are you today? Who do you want to be tomorrow? Who are you? What do you represent in this life? And what do you want to accomplish? That leads us into the second question. What do you want? That's what we're here for. You know, we're here to explore the relationships to help you get what you want. And if you're not sure what that is yet, the other two presentations will help you. The third question is, why do you want it? And that's really the question that might not be answered today. It might not be answered for a while yet. But we create something in tangible time and space. And we encourage functional relationships to help you understand why you want what you want. Okay, so who am I? What do I want? Why do I want it? So think about those questions first before listening to this presentation. And if you have absolutely no idea, the other presentations will really help you. The first production that I put out is the Most Meaningful Conversation. That deals with the present. The second presentation is a 2-hour presentation called the 21st Century Hero's Journey. That really deals with the past. And this one, the one-person presentation, deals with all of that information, helps put you into the future. You know, helps you to take whatever it is you have to teach, whatever it is you have to share, and plug it into the community where we can change the dynamic of all the relationships. So, so that's, I went over the first two, I went over the two intentions of this presentation. So I'm going to review one more time, and then we're going to go on into our main content here. So the first intention is to help you create a one-person presentation, to help you teach something, help you share something because you have something of value. And everybody in this earth, unless you're part of the 1% who own everything in this world, your value is undervalued. And we're going to change that today. The second intention is to help you to understand how to create functional relationships out of dysfunctional relationships so that we can change that dynamic starting today. Okay, so that's great. So you know your answers. Who am I? What do I want? Why do I want it? We're going to hit the ground running. We're going to have a lot of fun today. So I want you to first get out a piece of paper and a pen. So most everything I do requires some sort of written work. It's very interactive. So you're going to number your page from 1 to 5. Now do this very slowly because I have some specific instructions for you as you go on. So number it from 1, 2, And then at number 3, right under that, you're going to put 3 subcategories and label those A, B, and C, and then finish off with 4 and 5. So there are 5 points we're going to make today. Number 3 is going to have some subpoints. We're going to be doing a lot of drawing, and they don't have to be perfect drawings. It's just to help kind of anchor, the information that we're going to be given today. Today is about education and how to take what it is that you have to share and put it out into the world. So the first thing, and we are about 6 minutes in, so we're right on task here. The first thing you're going to write down in number 1 is visualize the 1-hour clock model. All right, I'm going to repeat that. Visualize the 1-hour clock model. So I'm going to have you draw a clock model. And we've done this in the most meaningful conversation. This is a recap for some of you. Is you draw a circle. There we go. Yeah, we're going to draw a circle. And then you're going to divide the circle in half by drawing a line through it from top to bottom, a vertical line. And then you're going to divide it again from left to right, a horizontal line, so that your circle is now in 4 equal parts. And then once that's done, with each quarter, each part, you're going to divide those up into 3 sections each. All right, so it's just, it could be like a straight line straight on through, so that when you're done, you have an actual clock with a 12 o'clock, a 1 o'clock, all the way over, 12 equal sections. And this is what you're going to visualize when you are creating your own 1-hour presentation. So now, before I go into the details of what you can be thinking about for your 1-hour presentation, I want to emphasize now that this is kind of like the finishing. We're finishing up the 21st Century Hero's Journey. This is the 8th exercise that I introduce as part of that hero's journey. It's the climax. It's the atonement. Joseph Campbell would call it the atonement with the Father. What that means is now that you're coming face to face with that which holds ultimate power over your life. And what truly has ultimate power over your life is not a president, not a king, not anything except your own critical mind. Okay? Just your own habits. That is what holds ultimate power over you. So you're going to create a 1-hour presentation to help you develop a new habit where you're sharing something, you're giving something of value that you can plug into a service and educational economy. So the first thing you're going to think of in the first 5 minutes, so you look at your clock, this is from 12 o'clock to 1 o'clock on your clock model. The first thing you're going to do is introduce yourself to your audience and start to ask questions about them. What attracted you to this material? What are some of the expectations? What do you hope to get out of this material? The things I asked at the top of this presentation is, who are you? What do you want? Why do you want it? So this is starting to really set the tone, set the stage so that you can build rapport with your audience and make it truly interactive. So then after the first 5 to 10 minutes, you're going to give you're also going to give a preview of what to expect. You can really create a lot of power in your communications, all your communications, if there's a understanding between you and your partners about what is the expectation, what do you want to get out of the next hour? And I told you, I'm going to give you a presentation where you can create your own 1-hour presentation based on your own material, and also how to create functional relationships out of dysfunctional relationships. So that's the first 5 to 10 minutes, and I'm exactly at 9 minutes, 30 seconds now in my presentation. So the most of your clock now, from 2 o'clock or 3 o'clock, 10 or 15 past the beginning, you're going to have 5 to 7 points that you're going to make. All right, 5 to 7 points, and I'm going to show you how to appeal to 100% of your audience with each one of your points. But if it's 7 points, pace yourself for 5 minutes each. If it's 5 points, maybe pace yourself for 7 to 10 minutes each. This presentation is going to go a little bit over 1 hour, but I would encourage you to stop the recording, and think about what are the 5 to 7 points you want to make in your presentation. All right, so go ahead and pause. I'm going to take a quick sip of my juice here, and we will move on. Then when you get into the 9 o'clock spot, so 45 minutes or 50 minutes into your presentation, that's when you're going to recap everything. And I think it's important. I think repetition is important. A lot of the things that we're going to be talking about, we're going to repeat at least 3 times. And the reason for that is the first time you come in contact with information, you're kind of introduced to it, but it doesn't get processed in that long-term memory yet. The second time you hear something, you hear content, that's when you start to actually hear the content of it. You start to think to yourself, you kind of put yourself in the position or the situation of what the content is introducing. So you start to embody it a little bit. And then the third time that you come in contact with information is when you start to master it. You start to master it and it becomes unconscious. So in the 21st Century Hero's Journey, we talked about how skills go from unconscious incompetence to conscious incompetence to conscious competence to unconscious competence. So I said a lot right there. I don't expect you to understand that right away. I just expect an appreciation for it, and that the more you watch this and the more you listen to these words, the more the content will start to be mastered. All right, so once for the introduction, twice for the content, thrice for the mastery. Okay, so that's why we review at the very end. And then in the last 5 minutes, you will ask your audience to do something. There will be a call to action there. If you're selling something, it's usually a good technique to say, hey, look, I'm going to give you 1 hour of very high content material. In exchange for all of that material, do you mind if I just give you a brief introduction of what to do next? What are some of my materials, my books, my other recordings, so that you can become more familiar with my material. I don't really sell anything, so the call to action that I will be making is just giving you next steps on how we can communicate more one-on-one to take this idea forward of a service and education market economy. So that's it. That's the 1 hour clock model. So we went through the entire, what's going to happen in this entire hour and how you can tailor it to your material. Okay, great. So we are 13 minutes in, and I just made my first point, which is exactly where we want to be, which is good because I do have to pace myself because I know from personal experience, 2 of my points are probably going to go over 10 minutes. But there's a lot of interactive stuff going on here, so that's great. So, I think we covered everything that I wanted to cover in the first 15 minutes here. So now let's go to number 2. All right, number 2 is cultivate actionable intelligence. All right, so now what is actionable intelligence? Actionable intelligence is really where you are given information and you can actually do something with it and do something about it. Everything that we are starting to understand here, especially about social media, mainstream media, all the things that are going on about how poverty is contrived, how people can bully you or gang stalk you or anything like that. It's all intended to help you. It's all intended to cause you to be in dysfunctional relationships where you don't really accomplish anything in time and space. Or you might start to accomplish something, but then you reach a barrier. And then there's really no answers on how to get past that barrier. So we can make goals and we can achieve those goals. But if we're not helping empower another, there's not actionable intelligence. And I first heard the term actionable intelligence from a woman by the name of Catherine Austin Fitz. And she, a lot of great material. I definitely recommend checking out her page about the Solari investments and how a lot of our economy is based on this competitive drive for profit to the point where we are told that we are $21-22 million in debt. It's possible that it's closer to 50 trillion. So I'm not going to, make any bare bones about that. I want to come right out and say, look, if this is the kind of information that begins to start circulating in our American society, we're heading towards an uber depression. And I think we need to face that with courage and with bravery and with enough actionable intelligence on how to reverse those effects. So my belief is this pyramid structure where people are compartmentalized is based on dysfunctional relationships. It's why we have an economy where 50% of the budget is dedicated towards military or war or contriving conflict, and why the military budget is 10 times more than the education budget. So that's why an education economy is very important here, especially in helping people understand the 2 to the 20th power equation. So the more people are cooperating and starting to educate each other in a non-competitive, safe atmosphere, the more we can start to turn things around and create compounded interest for everyone, so that the economy is not based on contriving problems anymore in the interest of driving profit. It's about reallocation for solving problems and for bettering the quality of life en route to a more resource-based economy or an open access economy. So I'm getting into a lot of technical stuff now that will be covered in a future presentation. So it's my intention to go into the nuts and bolts of reverse market mechanics or how to create an education and service market economy. What's most important is that you understand that where this entire project is going is to help each other educate each other in order to turn around some of the negative damaging effects of a competitive-based economy. So there are two analogies that I like to use to help you understand what it is we're doing and why these conversations matter. There's the classic riddle, and if you've heard the riddle, you already know the answer, but I'm going to tell it anyway. So here's the question. Here's the riddle. As I was walking to St. Ives, I met a man with 7 wives. 7 wives with 7 kids. 7 kids with 7 cats. 7 cats with 7 kids. Kits, cats, kids, wives. How many were walking to St. Ives? So if you know the riddle, and if you've heard it somewhere before, you already know the answer. Okay, so go ahead and finish up your calculations, and then when you're finished your calculations, I'll tell you the answer. Okay? All right, so have you already done the math, the 7 times 7 times 7 times 7? Now you have to ask yourself, now does the man count and does, anyway. Well, anyway, here's the answer. The answer is 1. That's it, 1. As I was walking to St. Ives, I met a man with 7 wives. And, so this is what we're dealing with when we're dealing with a competitive, complex economy. It's like, you got your education, your military, your medical, all of these institutions like hydras, like a 9-headed hydra moving its head around, and you're trying to figure out how do you stop it? How do you stop it? But you're mesmerized by all these heads. And the answer is simple. Go for the heart. When you're facing the hydra, go for the heart. Know yourself. What is your value? Where are you going? That's why I ask the questions. Who are you? What do you want? Why do you want it? And, but there's all this going on over here. Oh, but there's all this, slavery over here, and there's all this, poverty over here, and there's all this corruption over here. Who are you? What do you want? Why do you want it? Once you get centered on that, you can create actionable intelligence where we're all honored as equal partners and not compartmentalizing, not keeping secrets because we don't think that, the other person in front of us is not ready for that secret. So who are you? What do you want? Why do you want it? This is what leads to actionable intelligence. And it doesn't matter if you're just learning something for the first time or if you're a seasoned master. Both the teacher and the student are equals, and they're in an equal partnership. And when actionable intelligence is cultivated, there's not as much of a need for discipline. There's not as much of a need to correct or to coerce. Okay, we're all on the same page, and there's no secrets here. There's no secrets here. all you have to understand is that every single human being in this world has something of value to give, even if they're just beginning to find what that value is. And the only other thing you have to understand is that 2 times 2 equals 4. And 2 to the 20th power is 1.048 million. I'm just going to plant that seed again right now. I've planted it before in my other presentations, but that's all you need to know at this point for actionable intelligence. The rest is up to you and creating partnerships, because that's how a service and education market economy works. It flows through equal partnerships and not through a compartmentalized pyramid structure hierarchy. All right, so that's number 2. The point I made is number 2 is cultivate actionable intelligence. All right, so just a quick review as we go on. We're at 21 minutes now. Point number 1 is visualize your 1-hour clock model. Number 2 is cultivate actionable intelligence, okay, where we see each other as equal partners. And that takes a lot of work, and we're going to go into a little bit more of that work here in our next couple points. Okay, so number 3, you're going to write down 3 techniques for engagement. 3 techniques for engagement under number 3. So before I go into those 3 techniques, I'll give you a little bit more information about my background. I have been an acting teacher for over 20 years now. I'm also a life coach. I've studied NLP, neuro-linguistic programming. And I always used to teach my students that you can engage 100% of your audience if you tailor your performance to all 4 basic learning styles. Now, there's a lot of learning styles and there's a lot of different schools of thought with that, but there's 4 basic ways we learn and process information. That is, visually through the eyes, auditorily through the ears, kinesthetically through our feelings, through connection with our body and our emotions, and also auditory digitally, which is, using our hands, thinking logically, and putting pieces together or taking them apart. So you can engage 100% of your audience if you're sensitive to all 4 of those basic learning styles. So under A, the first technique is obviously make your point. Okay, so whatever it is, make your point. I like to start off with making my point, like I did with this list where I told you, okay, so the next one is 3 techniques for engagement. I'm making my point right away. I'm telling you more about my background with it, a little bit more of my story with it, and then I'm going to tell you again, make your point. That's the point. Make your point. Okay, so we talked at the beginning of the hour about 5 to 7 points that you're going to make in your own presentation. So that's the first thing you want to do is you want to know your points. And by breaking it down into 5 or 7 points, you're starting to appeal to those people who are auditory digital, who are the logical thinkers. B is encourage interactivity. All right, so write that down. B is encourage interactivity. And that's done by asking questions. It's done by a lot of these written techniques that we're doing, like making a list. In the most meaningful conversation, we did a 4-box model, where we did earth, fire, air, and water, which we're going to recap in this presentation as well. In the 21st Century Heroes Journey, we made 2 columns. In this one, we're doing a clock model, and we're also going to do a matrix in a little bit. Whoa, I'm Keanu, I'm in the matrix. I just always have to do that whenever I say the matrix. So you want to encourage interactivity. And again, that is done by questions, written activities. So you can make a list of some of the written activities we've done so far, like the clock model, like the list, like the matrix. Whatever kind of interactivity where you're not just up there talking, to a disembodied audience out there. You want to encourage as much interactivity as possible. And if you're looking for interactivity, check out the most meaningful conversation. That's all about creating interactivity. And then C is tell a vulnerable story about yourself. Now, I tell my acting students that you can appeal to the visual learning style if you have the right costume, if your body language is strong, if your blocking is a term that we use for staging, for where to move, when to move, how to move, and all of that. If the blocking is strong, all of this, costume, body language, posture, all of this will appeal to a visual learning style. If that's in place, the people who process information visually will say that was a very strong performance. I got a lot out of that. You will appeal to your auditory people if the writing is good, or if the writing resonates with the listener. You help your auditory learners by speaking clearly, speaking loudly, being sensitive to the tone and inflection and the timbre of your voice. Musicians especially are very sensitive to the auditory learning style. So I tell people, if you are really strong in that sense, 25% of your audience who are auditory-based learners, they're going to find a lot of value out of your presentation. The auditory digital learners, they're going to be paying a lot of attention to the plot. Does the plot make sense? Is there a sense of symmetry to it? Does it make sense? Does A lead to B and B lead to C? If it's a mystery, were all the clues prevalent, at some point? So, that's a lot more in the writer's hands, but as an actor or a presenter, knowing the character and exploring the character realistically will appeal to the auditory digitals. And then finally, and this is where we get into the vulnerable story, the kinesthetics. All right? You can fool 75% of your audience if you are technically sound. You're not going to fool the kinesthetics if you're not real, if you're not vulnerable, and if you don't really believe and feel what you're talking about. So I say, tell a vulnerable story. So my vulnerable story is that I do a lot of work in theater and improv with the mental health community, specifically with suicide survivors. We're currently doing a touring group called The Wizard of Iz, which addresses suicide and opening up, talking about suicide. And I always ask the question when I first begin the performance. I ask the audience, how many of you know someone who is suicidal, or are you suicidal? We did a performance a couple weeks ago where there was about maybe 50, 70 in the audience, and maybe 3 or 4 raised their hand. We did the entire performance, and then at the end, I asked the same question. After giving them a presentation that appealed to the visual, the auditory, the kinesthetic, and the auditory digital, almost everybody raised their hands after that. So we're dealing with a lot. We're dealing with a lot of people who are questioning the meaning of life and why is it important to go on in life. So this all began for me about 13 years ago, where a community theater that I used to belong to put out an email to all of their membership saying, hey, the president of the Mental Health Association of this county came to us and said, we want to do an improv experience or a theatrical experience that addresses suicide, and working with suicide survivors in the mental health community. Well, nobody stepped forward, and I was very interested in the project. I was a life coach. I was training to be a life coach at that time. I had been suicidal myself, and I really wanted to introduce the world of theater and expression to people who didn't have that outlet. So I volunteered, and the first day that I showed up, there was about maybe 10, 11, or 12 people who were there. I felt like that they were maybe dragged there against their will by their social worker or their mental health professional, and they were all kind of sitting, at least 4 or 5 empty seats apart. And we were in an auditorium at the time at a school. And everybody was kind of looking down. They were not communicating, not making eye contact or anything. And here I am, bright-eyed and bushy-tailed, ready to conquer the world, saying, "Look, we're going to do this drama program. We're all going to express ourselves, and we're going to have a great time, and we're going to learn things, and we're going to cure you of your depression." That's how Hebraic I was at the time. And they wouldn't move. They would just not move. So I asked the psychologist who had organized this whole thing. I asked him, "Do you have any suggestions on what I can do? They're not responding." And he just said, "You're on your own, kid." So I really just had to sit down for a moment and just say, hey, look, the reason why I'm here is probably the same reason you're here. I'm looking for healing. I was suicidal. And the reason being is that I used to work in investments. And over the 5-year course of 5 years, I saved every penny, and I ended up making a $10,000 profit in an investment. And I got pretty full of myself because of that. And I had come into a little bit of more money from another source at that time. And long story short, I left everything. I quit my job and decided I was going to be a trader. And that $10,000 that I made in 5 years, I lost it in a single day. And I panicked. I tried doing all kinds of quick turnaround trading as much as I could to try to recover that. And about 6, 7, 8 months later, the IRS comes and says, hey, with all these trades, there's a deficit of like $200,000. And wow, it was the kind of thing was, okay, I either get out of this by killing myself, or I turn myself in and say, look, this is what I can do in the prison system to help other prisoners. I mean, that's where my mind was at the moment. Luckily, a good friend of mine, I got reintroduced to a good friend who was an accountant, and says, look, you lost $10,000. You don't owe anything. Let me do the calculations. We'll turn it into the IRS. You're good to go. But yeah, it was the kind of thing where I just felt like a failure on all levels. And I looked up to my audience, and they were all listening, and they were all very, very empathetic and very, very loving, very warm. And we started to do the work that day. We started working on the improv skills, some of the things that I've introduced in the Most Meaningful Conversation. And long story short, about 6, 7 months later, after rehearsing maybe once a month for a good 6 or 7 months, they were performing in front of 100 people. Yep, my cat wants to get in on this conversation.